Good guess, let's talk game design, Dynam, and Dakota Vaughan. Rated games made in a week by me, Ikoso, Chatterbox, Madbook, and M in Space. To fit all of our schedules, we were able to work any 7 days on our games. Being the difficult person that I am, I picked dates that were way beyond everyone else's. And when I was ready to start, Zed sent me the theme. The theme was the elements, so I politely thanked him and started working. I figured I'd make something like rock, paper, scissors, but with combat. I also wanted to make it a card game because card games are cool and I've never made one. So first I got started on the art because I can't work on a game that looks bad. I began by doing what I always do, which is of course to make a good color palette. This was my second time making a custom color palette, and I'm really happy with how it turned out. When that was done, I drew some cards. Each card had an element which was either earth, fire, or water. Each card also had an item associated with it, which was either a sword, shield, health kit, or stamina. With the art done, it was time to actually start coding. To start, I made the scriptable object which contained every card inside of the deck. It has 2 arrays in it. One contains the types of cards that we have in the deck, and the second one contains the amount of times we want each card in the deck. And after the game starts, I wait a few seconds and then fire off an event which deals all of the cards. The cards then become children of the hand and will animate if the mouse is hovering over them. And while this is all pretty cool, we can't actually play and draw cards right now, so it's kind of useless. So I of course started to work on changing that. In the card-based script, I first check if we're clicking the card, and if we are, I then check if it's in the player's hand. That's the easy part. The hard part is actually playing the card, because I somehow needed to get a reference to the play area. Normally, I would just expose a variable to the inspector and then assign it from there, but I can't really do that with cards that are created at runtime. My solution was to base my whole entire game around events. When I want to play a card, I invoke the event on request play card. I pass in the card that I want to play, and my play area script listens into it. The cool thing about this is that most of it works with the AI, but the AI needed a way to figure out which card it was going to pick. And originally, I was going to try and learn machine learning and use Unity's ML agents. But luckily, Chatterbox talked me out of it, saying it was way too big in scope. Instead, I attached a script to the AI's hand. I then got all the cards in the AI's hand by using get components in children. I then made a getter called random card, which would just pick a random card from the bot's hand. And finally, the bot would just call the card's play method. And this, of course, all worked really well. Now, playing cards is cool and all, but the defining mechanic of this game is its combat. So I, of course, got started on that. But before I did anything with the visuals, I made a combat manager script to handle the elemental clashes. An elemental clash is just the byproduct of playing 2 cards because all cards have an element. As an example, if the player plays a water card and the AI plays a fire card, that results in a strong elemental clash because water is strong to fire. If the player plays an earth card and the AI plays a fire card, that results in a weak elemental clash because earth is weak to fire. And if they both play cards with the same element, it results in a neutral elemental clash. Elemental clashes just determine the strength of each item's action. If the player plays a sword card and has a strong elemental clash, the sword will do more damage. And if someone plays a shield with a weak elemental clash, it won't block, and etc. I got basic elemental clashes and item actions working by printing stuff into the console. Soon after, I drew these health and stamina bars, and I think they look pretty good. When that was done, I just had to transfer the logic for the elemental clashes and item actions to the visuals. Because I built this whole architecture on events, I just had to make the health and stamina bars listen into the on-item action events, and of course act accordingly. This worked great, but it was looking kinda bad, so I added some juice in the form of a slash particle and shake. I also made it so that when the player attacked, they made sure that they had stamina by using an event. If they didn't, then an event would be invoked which would shake the stamina bar. This was allowed, but you can never have enough juice, so if the player played a sword card and the elemental clash was either strong or neutral, I played these really cool particles. And finally, so that the player knew that they had a strong elemental clash, I drew these icons in Illustrator and made them faded when there was a strong elemental clash. At this point, it was the last day, and because I overscoped, I still had so much to do. I started the day by making some music, and I'm actually really happy with how this turned out. Because you're playing cards, I was going for some kind of jazz kind of thing, and ended up with something similar to jazz, but whatever it is, I like it. Unfortunately, I didn't have time to make sounds, but the music kind of covers that up, so it's okay, I guess. Going back to the combat, there was no visual feedback for when an attack was blocked, so to fix that, I made the slash particle play as well as some other particles, and made this shield animation fade in and out, as well as do some squash and stretch to show that it was blocking an attack. The last thing I had to do before I submitted the game was to make menus. I generally don't like doing this, and this time was no exception. But I did what I've done for a couple game jams now, which is to make the tutorial a kind of slideshow on the main menu. Each slide is a world space canvas, and I just have the camera transition between them. I then sped through the menus that appear when the player wins or loses, and the game was finished. But wait, the video's not done. Here's what a couple judges had to say about my game.
This is one of those games that you look at and think, yes, I understand this, it makes perfect sense, and then you play it and realise you understand precisely nothing. The AI is entirely random and I still can't win more than a third of the time, but I don't think that's the fault of the mechanics. The theme is obviously placed front and centre in a very pleasing and what I'd have thought would be easy to understand way, but I still struggle to wrap my head around matching swords with shields, but then some of them are on fire and some of them are wet and it's like playing 2 Pokemon battles at once. None of this is the game's fault, by the way. The game is really well polished, very nicely presented and a neat and succinct idea, executed very, very well indeed. I'm just bad at it.
Alright, Deconflict? Not sure how to pronounce that. I gave it a 7 out of 10 for the theme. The rock, paper, scissors type element thing worked decently well with the theme, just fit in pretty well. It was based on the elements, so I gave it a 7 out of 10. For gameplay, I gave it a 5 out of 10. I wasn't really too impressed with the gameplay. It just really felt like I as a player didn't have many strategic choices I could make. The rock, paper, scissors of the game was 2-dimensional, which is interesting. Like, for example, the fire, earth, and then on top of that you have the health kits, sword, and shield. But the thing is, with the health kit, sword, and shield, the sword is like if there was 1 sword and 2 papers, or like 1 scissors and 2 papers, because the sword, you always heal more than you take damage of with the health kits, and then with the, or unless you play like the certain element that you need or whatever. And then with the shield, it just blocks it entirely unless it's the right element, which, I don't know, it just felt kind of clunky and maybe a little bit overcomplicated. I think maybe if you simplified it down a little bit, I don't know, it just felt a little convoluted to me. But for visuals, I gave it a 9 out of 10. It looked very nice, everything was cohesive, you had some nice juice with the motion blur as the tutorial was going by. I liked that, it was very good. And then lastly, for audio, I gave it an 8 out of 10. Yeah, the music sounded really good. It wasn't annoying, and it was pretty groovy. However, I did dock points because you didn't have any sound effects. I think maybe like just some like card sounds. I don't know, like maybe like some fire or water whenever you play those cards. Just maybe a little bit more feedback for when you use your cards or whatever. But yeah, other than that, I gave the game an overall 6 out of 10.
And yeah, that's about it. All of the other participants' videos are in the description. In the description, you'll also find source code and a link to play the game. If you haven't already, join the Discord server, and thank you to Pludgy for boosting 3 times. And yeah, hit like if you like, also hit like if you dislike, and please subscribe. And have a great day.